You know what all these amazing vintage chisels have in common? I've never used any of them. Not once. Maybe this has happened to you. You're out at the flea market and you find that vendor, the one that's just all vintage tools. Somebody is selling off grandpa's stuff and it's going cheap. And yeah, there's saws and there's planes, but what really catches your eye is a big box of vintage chisels. And, when they're all in a box like this, it's usually something like chisels, $2 a piece or $3 a piece, and you get excited. You start pulling stuff out and you're like, this is amazing. Look at this. Oh, look at this little one over here. This is great. Hey, this one. I've never even seen a chisel like this before. I'm going to buy this. But here's the thing. If you've got a tool that you've never even seen before, there's a good chance that you don't know what to do with it. When you're looking at vintage chisels, you're going to see a lot of different shapes and styles, and it's easy to get confused. The biggest difference you're going to see is the type of chisel we're most familiar with has these sloped edges to it. This is called a bevel edge chisel. It's most familiar to us now, but there's another style, and if you're looking at antique chisels, you're going to see a lot of these. They have flat sides and they're square in cross section. This is called a firmer chisel. Firmer comes from the word former, and it just means to form. This was the chisel that the woodworker would use for forming the work, for knocking off big chunks of waste and doing the basic shaping. These could be used in your hand for sort of paring motions, but more importantly, they could be struck with a mallet. Especially back when chisels were made by blacksmiths, they were made using laminate construction. So there was a thin piece of hard tool steel that was forge welded onto a wrought iron body. Now, wrought iron is kind of soft. If you make a striking tool out of wrought iron and you hit it with a mallet, you might bend it. So when chisels were made this way, they had to be really thick and sturdy, and that carried over. This is a factory-made firmer chisel, but it still has a pretty thick, stout construction. So, firmer chisels are the old style. Does that mean they're obsolete? No. Well, maybe a little. Listen, firmer chisels worked back in the day. That means they still work today. If you got some firmer chisels and started woodworking with them, they'd work fine. I can even think of some modern, well-respected woodworkers who only use firmer chisels and swear by them. But woodworkers back in the day had another type of chisel in addition to their firmers. They also would have had this. This is called a paring chisel. And it's really different than the firmer chisel. It's a bevel edge chisel, and it's very long, and it's also very delicate. And it's for exactly what the name says. This is for paring. It can get in between things, so it can get in between your dovetails and get out the waste. It can reach into a long joint and nip out a few little fibers of wood. It can do all sorts of things, but it can't be struck. Tools like this were very delicate, and especially with materials during the blacksmith era, you couldn't hit these. They were for hand use only, and a lot of times the handles would sort of tell you that. They were designed to make it obvious that you couldn't strike these. So the pre-industrial woodworker would have had 3 or 4 firmer chisels with square sides and 1 or 2 bevel edge paring chisels. And over time, these two styles combined into this. This is called, most of us would just call this a chisel. Richard McGuire, who I respect a lot, calls this a strong bevel edge chisel. And it's what happened when you combined a firmer chisel with a paring chisel into a general purpose bench chisel. So this still has really a very stout construction, especially through here, which is the weak point. So you can strike this chisel all you want. It's got bevel edges, but they don't go to a super thin knife edge like you see on some chisels. They still have flats on the side here. These are called lands, and these make the chisel a bit more durable, less likely to chip at the corners. But because it's got these bevels, this is a very capable paring chisel. It'll get in between your dovetail waste. It'll get in between really anything. This style of chisel was really made famous by Stanley. They had a series of chisels called the 700 chisels, the 720s, 740, and 750s that were all different lengths but were basically in this style. And one of Stanley's big innovations is they made the entire body of the tool out of high carbon steel, and then they would harden it all the way up to here. So if you were using one of these, you could sharpen it all the way up to the socket and the chisel would still work. So over time, the woodworker went from having several different specialized chisels to several sizes of just one chisel. The one thing I didn't mention so far is Tang chisel versus socket chisel. And I didn't mention it because it doesn't really make a big difference. Tang chisels have a point that extends out from the blade, and that point is driven into the handle. And socket chisels are the opposite. The chisel is formed into a cone, and the handle slides into that cone. It used to be that socket chisels were the stronger variety, and you could definitely hit them harder, and Tang chisels were maybe a little fragile and not really suitable for hitting. In the modern era, this is not true anymore. This is just an Aldi chisel. Paul Sellers made these really famous. These are quite cheap when you can find them, and you can hit them all you want. They're fine. And this is just a vintage socket chisel, and they're also very inexpensive, and you can hit these as much as you want. It's just personal preference. Now, for me, whenever I work with a Tang chisel, the length and the size of the handle is a drag. I always just feel like I'm too far away from the point and I don't have great control. But again, totally personal preference. James Wright only likes Tang chisels. He never uses socket chisels. So it's just what you like. I prefer socket chisels. I like how short they are, and the way they fit my hand is just perfect no matter how I want to grip them. So these are the ones that I choose. You can totally just get a set of strong bevel edge bench chisels and call it a day. You can do everything with these. But in my real day-to-day woodworking, I find it handy to have a couple different things. I do really like mortise chisels. This is a vintage English style. It's called a pig sticker, which is a grisly and disgusting name, but the tool is very, very effective. Not only is it heavy, so it can take all the pounding you want, it also has, it's called a registered handle. It has flats on the sides. So the second you grab it, it registers in your hand and you're definitely going to hit it square. This is a great tool. Now, you don't see me use this in my videos. I mostly use this one instead, just because it's new and you can still buy it. This is a crown mortise chisel. Mine is 5/16 of an inch, and I do all of my furniture mortises with this chisel. They're all the same, so I only have one mortise gauge. It's set to this width. I don't even have an adjustable one. I have one, I don't use it, because I do everything at that 5/16 size. I do think it's a great idea to just have one if you're making furniture. 5/16 or 3/8 are both great sizes. It doesn't matter which one you pick. And if somebody's trying to sell you a whole set of mortise chisels, you should really think about that, because I really just use one and it's completely fine. The other style chisel that I do use, this is technically a timber framing chisel, and I use it because just once in a while you just need a big ass chisel that you can wail on and that is heavy and is also broad. This one's 1.25 inches. It's just great for a lot of things. If I'm doing a workbench with mortise and tenon joinery, I might pound the mortises using this. It's great because it's got the width, but it'll also go very deep. So I can mortise into like a big leg of a bench really easily with this. It's long, so I can pair with it if I need to. It's just handy to have around. I have a bunch of old timber frame chisels because I'm a hoarder, but this is literally the only one I ever use. This is my actual set of day-to-day chisels that I keep in my chest, and you see me using these in my videos. I've got 4 bench chisels, 1/2, 3/4, 1 inch, and 1.25 inches. It's really useful to have one chisel that's more than 1 inch wide. When you're going in to pare stuff, having a really wide blade it's almost like having a pocket knife. You just have more area to pare with. You can take a nice long slicing cut. My 1/2 inch chisel is in the Tang style because I don't know why. I just started using it and I like this chisel. I really don't overthink this stuff, if you haven't figured that out already. Mortise chisel, big timber frame chisel, that's it. Once in a while, I need a really skinny chisel for a specialty paring job, and I'll grab a chisel out of another set. I have so many sitting around. So occasionally I bring another one in, but I don't even keep this with my chisels because I use it so infrequently. This really gets the job done. And as you can tell, it's mostly socket chisels. While we're here, I'll show you something funny. Here's the rest of my socket chisel collection. I just have a jar of them. These are so easy to find at yard sales and flea markets. They're really worth picking up. I have so many. Here's another like really great paring chisel in a wide size. This would be really worth fixing up if I needed it. I've got skinny ones in here if I wanted. The one problem with socket chisels is sometimes the handle falls out and the user will keep hammering on the socket. So like here's a good example of one of those. This one might be savable. It probably is. Here's another one. This one's too far gone. I shouldn't have bought this one. But the thing about these is I don't think I paid more than $1 for any of these, especially when they're missing the handles. They're just so inexpensive and they're so good. I think you'd really have to go to a premium maker like Veritas or Lee Nielsen to get a chisel that's as good as this, especially in the socket style that's being made today. I have a complete YouTube video in how to find these on eBay and how to buy them for peanuts. They're really cheap and they're light, so they're easy to ship. I will link to that video down in the description. If you're out doing the estate sales and the flea markets, you're going to run into a lot of oddballs, and a lot of them you don't want to buy. So let's talk about a few. This is a real deal timber framing socket chisel. It is super huge and heavy. It's actually the exact same width as the timber framing chisel that I use day to day, but it weighs like twice as much, even without a handle. I've owned this chisel for like 4 years and I've never even restored it because it's so big and clunky that it's completely impractical in my shop. I'm never going to have a use for it. Speaking of timber framing tools, this is a corner chisel. You can see it's meant for getting into the corners of big timber frame mortises and squaring them up. It was only $5, so I couldn't keep myself from buying it. Again, years ago, I've never fixed it up. It doesn't make sense in furniture scale work. This is a sash mortise chisel, so it's made for window making, and it cuts a very specific size mortise for making sash windows. Some people still do that work, and it's extremely cool. Maybe someday I will. This chisel has also been modified. The tip has been ground at this weird angle for I have no idea why. It definitely did not come from the factory this way. I'd have to regrind it if I wanted to use it. This is a butt chisel. And it's short like this because this is for chiseling the hinge mortises on doors. So it'll get into a tight space and chisel a very wide, broad mortise. So they're little and stubby, and there's a metal cap on the end so you can strike it with a hammer. This is a carpenter's chisel. It's not a furniture maker's tool. This is well, I don't know what it is, honestly. It's a mortise chisel, obviously. It's 3/16 of an inch wide. It has a very fancy turned handle. It's from the Woodcock brand. I don't even have to make a joke. That makes its own joke. And what's it for? I don't know. A lot of these tools are for specialized trades. And if you were in the whatever trade, this would have been one of your day-to-day tools and was probably pretty expensive. It looks expensive. I never make 3/16 inch mortises for my furniture work. So again, I bought it because it looked cool and it was cheap, but all it's done, its whole life with me, was sit in a drawer. If you need to put together a set of really great bench chisels on a budget, I still recommend American-made vintage socket chisels. These are wonderful and they can be very inexpensive. This one's great. It's actually, it doesn't even have a brand name on it. It just says made in USA. This could even be a Stanley. It could be one of the super fancy Stanley 700 series, and Stanley made it and then sold it to a hardware store chain that sold it under their name. Who knows? Who cares? It's a good chisel. I have a whole video about how to find these on eBay, how to get them for a good price, and how to restore them and get them going again. I will link to that down in the description. I think it's totally worth the time and it won't cost much money. If you'd rather not screw around with all of that and you have a little bit of money to spend, you should probably just buy the Narex Richter chisels. These are probably the best mid-price, affordable, strong bevel-edge chisels on the market right now. I did not give these a good review when they first came out, and I was wrong. I was wrong about some of the things I said. I didn't like how long they were, and I didn't like the ergonomics, but that's just personal preference. I still do find them kind of long. I like a short little socket chisel. Again, that's just personal preference. These are beautifully manufactured. They hold an edge a long time. You can hit them, you can pair with them. They're not cheap, but you get what you pay for. And I think if you bought a set of these, you'd probably never really need to buy more chisels. Of course, then you wouldn't have an excuse to buy more chisels. And where's the fun in that? Don't we want to buy more stuff? I want to buy more stuff. Patreon.com/Rex Krueger. This channel is unsponsored. I don't take free tools. I don't read ads. I don't do any of that stuff. And that's only possible because I have patrons. Without them, this whole thing would not be economically viable. If you'd like to see all of the rewards I have for the people who make this content possible, go on over to patreon.com/Rex Krueger and check it out. We also super appreciate our viewers, and we appreciate you taking some time with us. Thanks for watching.